Having dyslexia is more than just learning how to read and spell in a different way. It's an entirely different way of thinking, with many other associations you may not even realize are related to having dyslexia. One of which is that students often struggle to remember the details and the order of events. So if a student is retelling a story that they read or events that happened over the weekend, they may not necessarily go in order. Instead, they'll focus on the big picture of the main ideas that happened, not necessarily the order in which that they happened. This also eventually ties into when they're trying to tie their shoes. They know the steps, but not necessarily the order that they go in. Frequently, students with dyslexia also have a hard time learning how to tie their shoes. I've actually had several parents ask me, how can my child tie their shoes? I helped my other kids, but I can't help this kiddo. He doesn't know how to do it. Can you try to help him? And I'll spend some time working on some different ways to break down the steps of how to tie their shoes. And this leads to the next bit, which is poor executive functioning. Executive functioning is really a fancy way of saying planning and understanding some sort of order and structure to how you do things. So students with dyslexia frequently have misplaced belongings and they don't know where they put things and they don't have very good routines. And so they often need some additional help to build in routines in order to make sure they get everything done in a timely manner and that they leave school and come back to school with everything they need in their folders and their binders. Frequently, kids will have to come back and find their lunchbox or their sweater, and they may need frequent reminders. Something that can really help with that is a checklist that gets followed every day. And the difference with kids with dyslexia is those checklists might become a permanent part of their structure and may not necessarily be something they just need for a week until they learn it. They might need it continuously to double check that they really do have all of their pieces before they leave to go somewhere. Additionally, dyslexia is also related to math. Students and math, you would think, would be very different. Sometimes kids with dyslexia are actually quite strong in math, but there's certain parts of math that can be quite challenging as well, and some you may not realize. One of which is math facts. Students with dyslexia frequently have challenges with math facts, which is related to that rapid automatic naming that is in one of the other sections of our modules. Students have trouble recalling information even though they know it. It is somewhere in their brain, but it doesn't take a continuous pathway to find its way out as they're doing larger math problems. So if a student is learning fractions and they need to know their multiplication facts, sometimes it's easier for them to use a calculator rather than trying to recall the information from their math facts. It's easier if they can break down the steps into one or the other, either working on the multiplication or working on the big idea of understanding how fractions work. The students can learn their math facts, it just might take them longer. So it's something that parents and students need to keep in mind. It might take a little extra practice, more than you're used to or more than you might expect. Additionally, math often includes reading. Students with dyslexia frequently struggle on word problems for two separate reasons. One is a word problem requires reading. So if a student is further behind in reading than what is written in their math textbook, they might need help having somebody read the problem to them because they may not be able to sound out the words. Another reason is that when we have word problems in math, oftentimes they're expected to do something in a certain order. And just to go back to what we just talked about, order can be very challenging for kids with dyslexia. They pay attention to the big picture, not necessarily the order that happened in the word problem that the narrator was trying to get them to follow. Students may need additional assistance to figure out the procedure of what they're supposed to do with the information if they didn't follow the order and structure and figure out what it was asking them to do. Students do much better if they have the big idea. So sometimes if they can imagine what is happening in the word problem, they do far better than just thinking about it as a random set of information. If they can envision it or draw it, they tend to do much better figuring out the steps that they need to follow to solve the problem. Students also struggle with word finding when they have dyslexia. Not all kids, because we are creating some generalizations. So just know that some students may have some of these struggles, but not all of them. Once again, dyslexia occurs on a continuum, so some students might present differently. Back to word finding. Word finding is that ability to rapidly recall information to articulate what they want to say. Students with dyslexia often have a challenge with finding the right words to explain what they want to talk about. For example, when I was teaching a student to read, we were using rather simplified books because they had words that only had spelling patterns that they could understand. when the student was reading a book about baseball. The story couldn't use the word baseball because that would have a silent E, and we hadn't learned that yet. So it had words like ball and bat and hit, and I had the student make an inference, what game do you think that they're playing? And all of a sudden she goes, and she pantomimed what was happening, and then goes, oh, baseball. It actually was faster for her to think about how she would act out the word than it was to find the right word to describe the word. And she was able to understand what the story was talking about, but was not able to quickly pull out the right word from her lexicon to be able to describe the story. It took having some sort of physical representation to pull it out of her and make a connection in her brain. This is actually quite common for kids with dyslexia. So you might have them say the thingamabob and the whatchamacallit, and you might hear them say phrases like that and say, oh, you know what I mean. And it's really because they're having a hard time finding the right word, even though they know exactly what they want to talk about. It doesn't always come out as easily. One thing that you can do is give them a choice. Is it this or that? And it helps narrow down the process of finding the right word if you're giving them some of the options of what it could be when they're about to answer a question. If you ask a student an open-ended question, it gives them too many places that their brain can go, and it's not easy for them to find a good answer for you. Being able to give a student a less open-ended question with limited choices makes it a lot easier for them to communicate clearly. Another thing that you may not realize is related to dyslexia is handedness, as in, are they right-handed or left-handed? Students with dyslexia are significantly more frequently left-handed than right-handed. When I was teaching in a general public school classroom, frequently I would only have 1 or 2 left-handed kids in my class. Once I started teaching at a school for dyslexia, sometimes half of my class would be left-handed. Another thing is that students with dyslexia are often late to decide which hand is dominant. For a long time, they may not realize if they're left or right-handed. They might use both hands for a little while till they determine which one feels more comfortable for them. So, while left-handedness is not necessarily always related to dyslexia, it does have a much higher incidence. And one thing that I've also seen that I do not have scientific evidence to back up is that I've seen a lot more dyslexia in twins. When I've worked with twins, I will see sometimes in a classroom year, I had 4 sets of twins in my class, but I did not have both siblings. Frequently, I saw where one child struggled more with reading and the other twin struggled more with spelling. And I just found that to be very interesting. So if you have some more experience or studies and research regarding dyslexia and twins, I would love to read more about it. And it's something that I just find to be an extra little tidbit that I find more interesting the longer I've worked with kids with dyslexia. I've seen more and more examples of dyslexia in twins.